So picture this for a second. It is the reading room of the British Museum, early 1920s.
Okay, I am picturing it. Very quiet, very serious.
Right, exactly. The space is hushed, it's cavernous, just lined with centuries of human knowledge. And amidst all these serious scholars of history and economics, there sits this one man surrounded by cardboard shoeboxes.
Shoeboxes. That is definitely not standard library equipment.
No, not at all. And inside these boxes are tens of thousands of tiny paper scraps, and each one is covered in incredibly cramped handwriting.
That sounds honestly exhausting.
Right. And if you were to actually lean over his shoulder and decipher the text, you wouldn't find notes on, like, Roman antiquities or Victorian trade routes.
Who would I find?
You would find meticulously cataloged records of the impossible. I mean, documented accounts of frogs raining from a clear sky.
Wow.
Reports of colossal unexplained explosions, even sightings of massive glowing wheels spinning beneath the surface of the ocean.
Well, I mean, it really paints the picture of a classic eccentric, just a harmless crank spending his days hoarding ghost stories.
Totally.
But what makes this image compelling is that this man was actively building a devastating critique of modern science. And he was using its own discarded data as his weapon.
Which is just wild to think about, and that is the core of today's deep dive. We are exploring the life, the mind, and the infamous shoeboxes of Charles Fort.
The man who essentially invented modern paranormal reportage, even though he openly claimed he didn't actually believe his own writings.
Exactly. We are tracing the path of a rebellious, self-taught kid from New York who transformed into this solitary researcher, a guy who dedicated his life to challenging the rigid scientific establishment of his day.
And his work ended up inspiring generations of science fiction writers and skeptics alike.
Right, and more importantly, this is an exploration of a phenomenon that you, the listener, probably encounter every single day. We are looking at how human beings decide what information qualifies as real and what gets quietly thrown away simply because it threatens our established worldview.
Because the questions Fort raised, they're arguably more urgent now than they were a century ago.
Oh, absolutely.
He was confronting the supreme arrogance of Victorian-era scientific consensus. This is a period when many physicists believed they had essentially figured out the universe, and they only needed to tidy up the decimal points.
Right, like, we know everything, let's just pack up and go home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the underlying mechanics of how humans process anomalous information or purposefully ignore it, well, that hasn't changed at all.
So understanding how someone commits 30 years to cataloging anomalies, it requires looking at the environment that shaped his mind. He was born in Albany, New York in 1874 to a family of Dutch descent. And he was introduced to absolute authority very early on.
Yeah, his father was a grocer and apparently a really harsh disciplinarian.
Like, beyond just strict, right?
Right. According to a later unpublished manuscript written by Fort, the discipline routinely crossed the line into severe physical abuse.
That is awful.
It really is. And it's not just a tragic biographical footnote. Biographers often point to this brutal dynamic as the genesis of Fort's deep-seated revulsion toward any form of institutional authority.
Because when the ultimate authority figure in your formative years is arbitrary and cruel and fundamentally unjust, it establishes a really powerful psychological precedent.
It creates a permanent skeptical reflex.
Yeah. If the person who is supposed to protect you and dictate the rules of your reality is demonstrably wrong, well, the jump to questioning a distant scientific or religious establishment becomes incredibly short.
Right.
You are already primed to ask why anyone claiming to hold the ultimate truth deserves your trust.
And that skeptical reflex defined his youth. Young Charles had this sharp intelligence and an intense curiosity about the natural world.
Right, he was collecting bird specimens, minerals, seashells.
Yeah, really demonstrating the meticulous habits of a naturalist. However, he outright rejected traditional schooling.
Because the classroom was just another arbitrary authority structure.
Exactly. He preferred to educate himself through voracious reading. He was totally self-directed.
And that self-directed approach escalated dramatically when he turned 18. He decided he needed to put some capital in the, quote, bank of experience. So he left New York on a solitary global journey.
Just wandering the world as a teenager.
Yeah. Throughout the 1890s, he traveled through the western United States, crossed the Atlantic to Scotland and England, and eventually navigated his way to southern Africa, purely to educate himself through direct exposure to the world.
And bypassing formal academia during this era meant something highly specific for his intellectual development.
How so?
Well, he was never indoctrinated into the prevailing scientific paradigms of the day. He never learned the proper taxonomies, which also meant he never learned the institutional rules about what types of data were supposed to be ignored.
Oh, that makes sense. It kind of reminds me of the modern concept of unschooling or like taking the most extreme gap year ever.
Exactly.
But I have to ask you, as someone looking at this, did this total bypass of formal academia make Fort uniquely open-minded? Or did it just permanently wire him to automatically reject mainstream consensus? It kind of feels like a razor-thin line between genuinely seeking the truth and just being addicted to rebellion.
That tension right there is the central pillar of Fort's identity. He possessed a brilliant, observant mind, but he also derived immense, undeniable pleasure from mocking the establishment.
So he enjoyed poking the bear.
Oh, absolutely. He didn't merely question consensus, he actively hunted for ways to humiliate the people who enforced it.
Well, his grand attempt to gather worldly experience came to a pretty abrupt end when he contracted a severe illness in southern Africa. He was forced to abandon his travels, returned to New York to recover, and was nursed back to health by Anna Filing, a woman he had known since childhood.
And they eventually married in 1896.
Right, and this marriage anchored him, but it also forced him to confront the harsh reality of having to actually earn a living.
Which is hard when you're a roaming autodidact. The transition to a married man living in the Bronx initiated a period of intense poverty and professional failure for him. He needed a container for his restless intellect that could also generate income.
So he turned to writing.
Yeah, he started churning out stories for newspapers and magazines, but with very little financial success.
The sheer volume of his output during this time is staggering, though. I mean, he wrote 10 complete novels trying to fit his sprawling thoughts into the marketable conventions of mainstream fiction.
And only one of those manuscripts was ever published.
Right, a story about tenement life called The Outcast Manufacturers, and it was a total commercial flop.
Watching him try to contort his mind into standard literary formats is fascinating, especially when you look at his unpublished attempts at early science fiction.
Oh, these are wild.
Yeah, he wrote a novel detailing a scenario where Martians secretly control human events,
Way ahead of his time.
and another one about a sinister, advanced civilization hiding at the South Pole.
I mean, people would buy that today in a heartbeat. And he actually had a really prominent advocate in his corner, too, the famous novelist Theodore Dreiser.
Yeah, they were close friends. Dreiser actively tried to leverage his industry connections to get these sci-fi manuscripts published.
But it didn't work.
No. Despite Dreiser's influence, publishers universally rejected them. And the repeated rejections just broke Fort's resolve. He was so discouraged that he threw the manuscripts into the fire.
Wait, he burned them?
Literally burned his fictional worlds to ashes.
Man, that is bleak. So how did he get from burning his life's work in a Bronx tenement to hanging out in the British Museum reading scientific journals all day?
Well, the destruction of those manuscripts was kind of a necessary crucible. Because he was failing in the commercial market, he remained trapped in poverty. But that dynamic shifted massively due to a sudden external change. In 1916, his uncle passed away, leaving him a modest inheritance.
Okay, a lucky break.
And then the following year, his brother died, resulting in a second small inheritance.
So sad, but definitely financially freeing. It wasn't enough to make him wealthy, but it provided absolute basic security. It kind of functioned like a lifelong Patreon sponsorship or like a universal basic income.
Exactly. The immediate consequence of removing the daily terror of survival was that Fort just stopped trying to monetize his mind. He no longer had to care what an editor wanted to buy.
Right. Complete financial independence decoupled his intellect from commercial demands. So with his fictional ambitions turned to ash and his rent permanently paid, his eccentric genius shifted its focus entirely to the real world.
He transitioned from a struggling novelist to a self-appointed auditor of reality itself.
Which marks the birth of the methodology that would define his entire legacy. He moved his base of operations into the library system, just shuttling back and forth between the New York Public Library and the British Museum in London.
And he wasn't reading tabloids or penny dreadfuls either.
No.
He was systematically combing through the most respected global scientific journals, obscure academic magazines, and daily newspapers of record.
And as he read, he extracted anomalous reports and documented them on those small scraps of paper we talked about. His filing system was this labyrinth of cardboard shoeboxes, categorized using a logic only he understood.
At the height of his research, he amassed an estimated 48,000 individual notes.
48,000! That is insane!
And there was this legendary anecdote about Forte sitting on a park bench, and he accidentally drops a handful of these notes.
Oh, no.
And instead of chasing them down, he just lets them blow away in the wind.
Just lets irreplaceable research blow away. I mean, that reveals a lot about his mindset. He wasn't precious about any single data point. He was focused entirely on the aggregate. He was building this massive, overwhelming catalog of what he famously termed damned data.
Damned data. It remains one of the most evocative concepts in the philosophy of science. Fort recognized that science advances by building clean, unified theories about how the physical universe operates.
Right.
But nature is inherently messy. Researchers inevitably encounter observations that directly contradict their clean theories.
So what do they do?
Well, Fort argued that instead of revising the theories to accommodate the messy reality, the scientific establishment simply ignored the inconvenient facts. They damned the data by sweeping it under the rug.
And the culmination of this research arrived in 1919 with the publication of his landmark text, The Book of the Damned. And once again, Theodore Dreiser intervened to secure a publisher.
Yeah, Dreiser really championed him.
And the book was just this relentless barrage of the impossible, sourced entirely from credible publications. He presented meticulously recorded instances of spontaneous human combustion. He cataloged sightings of ball lightning and mysterious lights in the sky, decades before the cultural concept of UFOs even existed.
He documented out-of-place artifacts, too, like manufactured tools discovered encased in seams of coal that geologists insisted were millions of years old.
He even coined the word teleportation to describe the sudden, inexplicable movement of objects.
The sheer volume of material is overwhelming, but the actual mechanism of his writing is where his true genius lies. He didn't just present a list of weird events.
No, he placed these anomalies right next to the official scientific explanations of the day, specifically to highlight how flimsy and inadequate those official explanations were. But wait, I have to play the skeptic here for a minute.
Go for it.
Processing 48,000 unstructured data points manually, decades before the invention of computers or relational databases. That just seems like a recipe for catastrophic confirmation bias.
Right.
I mean, if you scour enough newspapers looking for weird events, you are going to find them. So was he actually discovering a hidden magical layer of reality? Or was this just a massive, petty exercise in cherry-picking data just to mock the scientists he despised?
Well, you have hit on the exact debate that scholars continue to have about his work. Many contemporary critics found his prose dizzying and his arguments incoherent. They just dismissed him as a patron saint for cranks.
Sure.
But an honest reading of his texts reveals something much more sophisticated. Fort would likely admit that his work was entirely built on confirmation bias. In fact, that was the entire point.
Wait, if he is admitting to confirmation bias, then the shoeboxes weren't a pursuit of objective truth at all. The entire decades-long project was essentially a performance art piece about the fragility of the scientific method.
Precisely. His goal was epistemological satire. He wanted to demonstrate that if a person is allowed to cherry-pick their data, they can construct a perfectly logical theory to support absolutely anything. He was accusing the scientific establishment of doing the exact same thing to maintain their accepted models, just with better public relations and institutional backing. He was holding up a funhouse mirror to academia, effectively saying, "Look at the bizarre, intricate universe I can build out of the data you threw in the trash. What does that say about the fragility of the universe you decided to keep?"
That is brilliant. And it reframes his most absurd ideas perfectly. Like, for example, he frequently wrote about this hypothetical thing called the Super Sargasso Sea.
Oh, yes. The Super Sargasso Sea is the perfect illustration of his method.
For those who don't know, it was this idea of an invisible gelatinous region hovering in the upper atmosphere where lost objects float around until they periodically drop to the earth, which would explain the reports of falling frogs or stones.
Right. And Fort knew the theory was completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
He explicitly stated that he did not believe his own theories. He used the Super Sargasso Sea as a rhetorical weapon.
How so?
Well, when a small town reported thousands of frogs falling from the sky, local meteorologists would often claim, a localized whirlwind picked them up from a nearby pond and dropped them.
Even if there was no evidence of a whirlwind and absolutely no local pond was missing its frogs.
Exactly. The meteorological explanation was a complete fabrication designed to protect the paradigm that frogs do not fall from the sky. So Ford juxtaposed his absurd Super Sargasso Sea against the meteorologist's fictional whirlwind to prove a point.
That his ridiculous theory fit the observed data just as well, if not better, than the flimsy explanation offered by the authorities.
Right. Both were just narratives invented to explain away the damn data.
A reviewer for the New York Times actually captured this perfectly in 1931 when reviewing one of his later books, Low. They described the experience of reading Fort as taking a ride on a comet.
I love that description.
Right. The reviewer noted that his writing induces this dizzying emotion that permanently colors how you read all subsequent serious scientific literature. It forces the reader to confront the unconscious assumptions that prevent true objectivity.
But that dizzying effect had unintended consequences. Fort's work was designed to poke holes in dogma, but it accidentally sparked a movement of people who took his anomalies incredibly seriously.
Yeah, the man who spent his entire life running from authority slowly and very reluctantly morphed into a prophet.
It is the bizarre irony of his later life. By publishing the Book of the Damned, followed by New Lands, Low, and finally Wild Talents, he attracted a highly influential fan base.
And these weren't just fringe thinkers, they were heavyweights of the literary and entertainment worlds.
Yeah, so in 1931, his most famous advocates, including Theodore Dreiser and the prominent Hollywood screenwriter Ben Hecht, they decided to institutionalize his legacy. They organized this lavish gathering at the Savoy Plaza Hotel in New York City with the explicit goal of founding the Fortean Society.
Oh man, they actually lured Fort to the hotel under false pretenses. And when they revealed they were forming a society in his honor and wanted him to be its first president, he completely rejected the entire premise.
He was horrified by the gesture.
I bet.
He recognized immediately that an organization dedicated to his work would inevitably attract gullible zealots and blind believers, which was the exact opposite of his fiercely skeptical philosophy.
Becoming an authority figure was his ultimate nightmare. He championed what scholars often call an agnostic skepticism. He didn't want to replace the dogma of mainstream science with a new paranormal dogma. His philosophy demanded that people remain in a perpetual state of suspended judgment.
It's the tragedy of the brilliant satirist who accidentally founds a religion.
Totally. He spent his entire life begging people to question everything they read, only to become the patron saint for a demographic of people desperately searching for something new to believe in.
But he remained remarkably consistent in his refusal to become a guru. He publicly reiterated, "I believe nothing of my own that I have ever written."
And he maintained this stance right up until his final days, just pouring all of his remaining energy into his writing while his physical body failed.
Yeah, his final months perfectly encapsulate his lifelong defiance. His health was rapidly deteriorating, and his eyesight was failing, making it incredibly difficult to navigate his beloved archives.
And true to his deep-seated distrust of authority, he refused to engage with the medical establishment. He severely distrusted doctors and rejected professional medical intervention as his condition worsened.
His singular obsessive focus was just completing the manuscript for his final book, Wild Talents.
And the timeline of his passing carries this strange, poetic weight. On May 3rd, 1932, his failing body finally collapsed, and he was rushed to a hospital in New York. Later, that exact same day, his publisher arrived at his bedside carrying the advance printed copies of Wild Talents.
So he actually got to hold it.
Yes, he was able to physically hold the final manifestation of his life's work. And just hours after seeing the book, Charles Fort passed away, likely from leukemia, at the age of 57.
He was buried in a family plot in Albany, essentially returning to the geographical origin of his lifelong battle against authority.
But while his physical journey ended there, the cultural shockwaves generated by those shoeboxes of data were just beginning to spread. I mean, the term Fortean officially entered the lexicon to describe anomalous phenomena, and his name lives on today through publications like the Fortean Times, which continues to investigate the unexplained through a skeptical lens.
But looking at the broader culture, his most profound impact might actually be the foundation he laid for modern science fiction.
Which is a beautiful irony, considering he burned his own early sci-fi manuscript.
Right. The real-world anomalies he curated became the raw, fertile material for generations of groundbreaking writers. I mean, literary giants like Philip K. Dick and Robert Heinlein drew heavily on his concepts.
Didn't Stephen King mention him too?
Yes, Stephen King explicitly references Fort's influence. In his novel Firestarter, a character is directly advised to read Wild Talents to understand paranormal abilities.
That's awesome. And his influence extends deeply into cinema as well. Like Paul Thomas Anderson's critically acclaimed film Magnolia is heavily structured around Fortean's concepts. The film explores the profound interconnectedness of seemingly random, unexplained events, culminating in a sequence that is pulled directly from the pages of The Book of the Damned. Anderson even included a physical copy of one of Fort's books in a library scene and placed a thank you to him in the closing credits.
Because Fort's underlying assertion that reality is far more malleable, deeply weird, and subtly organized than science admits, it resonates powerfully with creative minds.
Creative minds are drawn to Fort because he understood a fundamental vulnerability in human psychology. As a species, we have this overwhelming psychological need for certainty. We demand clear narratives. When faced with the unexplained, we tend to either completely surrender to magical belief, or we aggressively, sometimes irrationally, reject the anomaly to protect our worldview.
And Fort forced himself to live in that deeply uncomfortable, ambiguous space right in the middle, refusing the comfort of either extreme.
And that psychological vulnerability actually brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Charles Fort spent his life battling a Victorian scientific establishment that threw away data because it ruined their neat, orderly models of the universe. They curated their reality by excluding the weird, the challenging, and the damned.
They built filters to protect their consensus.
Exactly. Now, look at the architecture of our modern digital lives. We exist inside highly personalized, algorithm-driven information feeds. The math tracking our behavior knows exactly what we like, what political views we hold, and what narratives make us comfortable.
And it constantly feeds us information that validates that worldview, while quietly hiding or deprioritizing the data that contradicts it.
Right. The technological mechanism has changed, but the epistemological result is exactly the same. Are these algorithms simply functioning as customized digital shoeboxes of excluded data for every single one of us?
It's a scary thought. In an era defined by total information access, we rarely see the full picture.
Instead, we're actively participating in the curation of our own realities, willingly ignoring the facts that do not fit the narrative we prefer. It really forces the question. Are we all just doing exactly what Charles Fort accused those rigid 19th century scientists of doing over 100 years ago?
It strongly suggests that the instinct to damn the inconvenient data is not just a flaw of the scientific method. It is a fundamental flaw in human nature.
So keep that in mind the next time you quickly scroll past an article that challenges your core beliefs, or the next time an authority figure points to a simple chart and assures you that the world is perfectly understood. Just remember the man sitting on a park bench, letting his precious notes blow away in the wind, entirely at peace with the fact that the universe will always be far stranger than we are willing to admit.